Hello, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk to you about the OpenSea NFT API, and we're going to use it to build this web application that lets us explore NFT data from a variety of angles. And we're going to be able to build this web application using only about 100 lines of Python code. It's going to be built on top of Streamlit, which is a popular Python package for building these types of interactive data exploration dashboards, right? And so we're going to build a variety of tools into our web application. So the first is a rarity tool that hits the OpenSea NFT API. It gets all of the NFTs in a particular collection, and it sorts them by rarity by looking at the traits that those NFTs contain. So this particular NFT has, a right arm with an antenna and a left arm with a skull, and that has a certain rarity in that collection. So only certain NFTs in that collection have those traits. And what we can do is make our own little formula to order all of these NFTs in a particular collection by our rarity according to whatever formula we put in. Also, we're going to use a couple of the other endpoints. The next endpoint we're going to use is going to let us pull in all the assets that are owned by a particular Ethereum address. So my Ethereum address is in here by default. You can see different NFTs I own, and we can also filter by a particular collection. So if I want to show all the NFTs that I own in the Wanderers collection, I just type the collection slug there. And you can see I own Wanderers number 7543, and I also show the raw JSON data that comes from the NFT API in case you want to show other bits of data that may be of interest to you. The other thing we're going to do is pull in events using the OpenSea API. And so you can see here, I'm pulling in all the latest offers that were entered for the Wanderers collection. So I can watch all of the bids and ask, and I can watch whether orders were canceled, bids were withdrawn, when there were bids approved, and you can see all the price action that occurs on NFTs. And why might you want to do this? Well, if you've been watching recently, NFTs are a very popular topic right now because, look at this, someone sold a digital asset for $4 million. There's been this Beeple one sold for like $69 million. Popular collections like Bored Ape Yacht Club, there's a huge following and communities around them. This one, you can see the minimum bid is $168,000. And so naturally, this is attracting a lot of speculation and also people that say they're just in it for the art. I'll let you decide which one you are. I'm personally interested in cryptocurrencies and their applications and price. I'm interested in making profits, and I'm interested in collecting things. I collected baseball cards and comic books and all that stuff growing up. So this is very cool to me. And you'll see that people are making a variety of tools if you look around. So very new to exploring what's out there. You see there's this rarity tools here. That ranks, does the same thing. It ranks NFTs in a collection by rarity. So they say that this is the rarest NFT in the Wanderers collection because the left arm, has the chicken leg or whatever, right? And so we're going to build a tool like that. And I've also seen tools like this. It's called Icy Tools. So this tool will let you explore trending collections. So maybe some have more bids or more NFTs being minted. So you can quickly jump in and ape into a particular NFT collection because a lot of other people are buying it. And so this even, I think, will show different time frames and charts. And also, I think you can get alerts when particular NFT collections drop. And, some people build bots that sweep in and buy them all cheap and then flip them to other people that find out about it later. So there's a lot of tools being built right now. And I've even jumped into some of these Discords. You'll see this person Fleur posts and say, hey, let's all bid up the prices on these. And they'll see he even posts, or he or she posts a buy range 0.35 to 0.4. And a bunch of people sweep in and do this. And I had actually bought this Wanderers NFT that I heard about, Packy McCormick, who writes this popular newsletter, Not Boring, posted, check out this Wanderers NFT collection. It has a cool roadmap. I looked at it and I aped in and I bought one, right, for like 0.3 ETH. And there's that collection right there. You see it has a floor price of 0.5. Kind of neat. It's not just a JPEG. It's like a movie. It has music. And they have a lot of cool plans on the roadmap. So you can hang out in their Discord here and see what they're up to. So they have announcements. A bunch of people are in here talking about it as we speak, right? So yeah, I own one of these. I'm getting bids on it. I'm studying the price action. And I even saw the price on this thing pump up afterwards after I bought it because it was posted in that Fleur Discord, and I saw the price double from like 0.3 to 0.6 ETH briefly there. And there's people making bids for my NFT right now, so I haven't accepted any of these yet. So yeah, 0.5 ETH, $1,600. It's going to take a lot more than that to get my JPEG from me. So try again, keep bidding, and maybe I will accept. All right, let's write some code here. I have Visual Studio Code open. As usual, I'm going to create a file called requirements.txt. I'm in a brand new directory called OpenSea NFT API, right? You can call your folder whatever you want. And we're going to install a couple of dependencies. We're going to use Streamlit, which we're using for our visualization. So that's streamlit.io, the fastest way to build and share data apps. We're going to use requests, which is a popular Python package for making HTTP requests. I'm going to install Web3, which I already did a tutorial video on. It's Web3 Pi. It just has some utilities for doing conversions. We're only going to use it for conversions right now, but there's also some utilities for browsing the blockchain. And then I'm also going to use Pandas, which provides nice data frames that we can filter and slice and dice however we want. And I'm going to start up a new terminal here in Visual Studio Code. And if I do pip3 install -r requirements text, I can install all of the dependencies in this particular text file, or you can just install them individually if you just want to do pip install Streamlit, and I'm using Python 3 and pip3. Okay, so those dependencies are all installed, and the first thing we'll do is briefly study the OpenSea API. So it's at docs OpenSea. So if you Google for OpenSea API NFT like that, you'll find this non-fungible token API overview, and this exposes all of the data in OpenSea. And if you'll notice, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing on this particular application can be done with the OpenSea web app you already have, but in order to remix this data and make your own tools, it's important to be familiar with the data sources and the endpoints that their web application uses, and then you can remix it with other APIs and your own custom UI and build whatever you want, right? And so these are the few of the endpoints that are used. Here's the first one, retrieving assets. So let's just see how we'd make a basic HTTP request to retrieve some assets. So you see the endpoint here. It is a GET request to api.opensea.io. And so I can just copy that. And let's create a new file called assets.py. And we're just going to pull all of the assets in a particular collection, right? And so what I can do here is import my requests package. And then we can just do request.get. So we'll have a variable, and I usually just call it r equals request.get. And we're going to request that assets endpoint, and then we're going to print r.json, right? And that's going to give us back our data in JSON format. And just like that, you see a bunch of data got dumped to the screen here, right? In a nice format here, and not very easy to read. So we're going to want to put this in a separate file and maybe study this a little bit more and look at what this endpoint provides us. Now, that just gets us any old asset, so it's going to return some fixed number of them. But let's go ahead and filter this down a little bit. So we don't want to retrieve all assets, right? We only want to retrieve assets that meet particular conditions that we're interested in. So if you scroll down here, you'll see there's these query params. So we can query for particular token IDs, for particular contract addresses. We can order and sort by different conditions. We can filter by collections and so forth. And so what I'm going to do here is filter by collection, right? And so I can create a new dictionary here called params. And I'm going to create a dictionary there. And you can see we can filter by collection. It says you want the collection slug, right? And so I'm calling it collection. So the key is called collection. And if I go to Wanderers NFT here, you see that the slug here is in the URL. It's called the-wanderers. And so I can filter by that. So I do collection, the wanderers there. And then what I'm going to do is, as a parameter to request.get here, I'm going to do params equals params. So I'm going to pass the parameters here. And then when I run this again, which had happened, it'll filter all these to only assets are in the Wanderers collection. Okay, and that's a few too many for me to look at right now, so I'm going to limit the number. And so you can also limit the number, right? So limit. So I'm going to pass a limit, and let's just limit it to 1. Okay, so I'm just going to fetch 1 NFT here. So that's just a simple request to the OpenSea NFT API. So how to use Streamlit? So that's just a command line app. How to use Streamlit? So I'm going to create a new file. I'm just going to call it nft.py, and I'm going to import Streamlit. Okay, and what I can do after I have Streamlit installed is I can do Streamlit run nft.py. So when I run that, you see a new web browser opens, and you see there's nothing there yet, but I already have a web application just by typing a Streamlit run, and there's this little menu on the side. So I have this empty canvas here, and I just need to put some widgets on it to design my UI. So I'm going to do import Streamlit as st, and I can just do st-write, for instance, and write some text. And so that'll go in the main content, but if I want to write something to the sidebar, I can do st.sidebar .write some sidebar text, right? And let's look at what that looks like. So you see it says source file changed. I can click rerun, and it runs that script just in line like that and creates a UI. So since I did .sidebar.text, right, it did some sidebar text. And since I did st.write some text, it went right here, right? And so now let's just call more and more of these functions and build our UI. So I'm going to create a select box. So I can do st.select box. And I'm going to make a select box for my different endpoints, right? So I'm going to call it endpoints. And then I just give it a list of the different endpoints I want to hit. So let's say I want to hit the assets endpoint, the events endpoint, and the I'll have one called rarity here. And those are my different options, right? And when I do that, I'm going to do always rerun, and that way every time I save it, it'll update this UI. So you see I have a dropdown just like that. I just gave it a label, which is endpoints, and a list, and that list provides the options for this dropdown here. And so if I just do st.sidebar.selectbox and hit save, you see how that automatically reloads. So I have my endpoints, and now they're on the sidebar, right? So that's great. And then we have some text here. And so I'm going to make that a header. So they have st.header. And now some text is big. And I'm going to type OpenSea NFT API Explorer right there. Just like that. And what I'm going to do is display what endpoint I'm currently showing, right? So if it says assets here, I want to show assets over here. And if I show events here, I want the title to say the title there. And so what I can do is an F string like that. And then I'm going to store this sidebar select box in a variable. So I'm going to say endpoint equals st sidebar select box. And then I'm going to put that endpoint in this string, right? So now if you look at that, I'm going to put a dash. And you see Open NFT API Explorer events, because events is selected. I'm going to switch it over to assets, and then switch it over to rarity, just like that. And now let me switch back to assets. And now let's go ahead and plug in our assets call here. So let's do the same thing. So we're going to import request.json. And then let's go ahead and just take this little snippet from the script we wrote, and let's show this whenever assets is selected. So we have endpoint stored here. So what we can do here is do if endpoint equal assets. Then we'll make this request and dump it on the screen. Now, instead of doing a print here, we're going to do a Streamlit's version. So we're going to do st.write r.json like that. Okay. And yeah, let's try that. If endpoint is assets, let's make this request and dump it to the screen. And you see, I didn't have to do anything. I didn't need to rerun it. You see how it dynamically reloaded the page, and we have the JSON browser right here. So we didn't really need to prettify it in our text editor. Now I have this cool collapsible widget. So just like that, they made the JSON very easy for us to read, right? And so there's that. So instead of 1, let me go ahead and just remove this limit now and save it again. And you'll see it refetches the data, and we should see more than one asset. So you'll see this will probably pull in like bunches of them, so like 50 of them. I think 50 will be the default, and we have this nice JSON structure that we can browse, right? And so we can filter on collection, and we can also filter on a particular account or Ethereum address. And so this, I don't want to hard code the wanderers in the collection in these parameters. So what we'll do is make an input box. So if you go to the Streamlit homepage, streamlit.io, and you click on documentation, you should be able to browse through the documentation here. You can see there's a text input here, right? So there's st.text input. So what we can do is on our sidebar, let's say, let's create a subheader. So sidebar.subheader. And then I'm going to put the subheader filters, and then we can do st.sidebar.text input since we want the text input on the sidebar. And the text input, we'll call it a collection and let the user type in the collection, right? So if I jump back to my dashboard, you see I have this nice text input box for collection. And let's also add one for the owner of the collection. So if I go back to the documentation here, you see there's a filter for owner. Okay, so I'm going to create a filter for owner as well. So I'm going to do st.sidebar.text input owner. And then you can just type in the address of a particular owner here. And so if I go back to my app, let's see if that worked. Yeah, so I saved it, and you see I have input fields for collection and owner. And so if I go back, let's see if we can find a different collection. So I have this Unusual Whales NFT here, and that's part of the Unusual Whale NFT collection. So if I type in Unusual Whale NFT in here, I should be able to pull in some whales. So let me enter that in, let that run. You see it's making the request. And if I open and expand this, you will see that nothing happened yet. It's still showing the wanderers. Why? Because my filter here still has collection the wanderers, right? What I want to do is store the result of this text input. I'm going to store it in a variable called collection, and I'll store this owner input into owner. And then instead of the wanderers hard-coded here, I'll use collection, so it'll be dynamic, just like that. And now if I go over, you see how it fetched the whales, right? So whales number 6967. And then if I were to find the, let's see what the Bored Ape one is. So Bored Ape Yacht Club, there's that slug. If I go back here, type Bored Ape Yacht Club, you see how it pulled in. It's fetching now, and then you see Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT version 3, and there's a thumbnail. And so if I look at this, I should see a picture of a bored ape, and there is the thumbnail URL right there. Okay, so cool, lots of stuff happening. We're already filtering by collection. Now let's filter by owner. So I can click here and get my Ethereum address. So I'm going to copy this to the clipboard, and let's put my address in there. And that's not going to do anything yet, right? So we also want to be able to filter. So what we should do here, if endpoint equals assets, let's set the parameters to empty by default, right? So by default, we don't want to filter by collection. We only want to filter by collection if this is set here, right? If it's not empty. And so what we can do is do if collection, then we can say params collection equals collection, right? And then we can say if owner, we can add on, right? So we're building this a chain of filters only if they're set, right? So if I don't have an owner set, we're not going to filter by owner. And so if there's a collection, we're going to add collection to the parameters dictionary. If there's an owner set in the input, we're going to add an owner to the parameters, right? And so that should work just like that. And then by the time it gets here, our parameters dictionary is built out. Okay, so I have the current filters as Bored Ape Yacht Club and owner me, and I own no bored apes, unfortunately. So we have an empty response coming in here. Okay, but what if I remove the collection filter here, and then I just do owner? There we go. This will show all the NFTs that are owned by my address. So this isn't very interesting yet as just a blob of JSON data. You know, we'll show that for reference, but also we want to display something visual. So let's actually show these image URLs and maybe the token ID, the description, and things like that. So I want to browse my NFT collection visually in my own interactive dashboard here. So what I'll do here is I will do a response equals r.json, and then I'll do for asset in response, and the key is assets. So response assets. I'm going to write out, what am I going to write out? The image URL. So let's do st.image actually, and we'll do asset and then image URL, right? Image URL. And if I do that, I should see some images here, and look at that. So you see my whale that I own, and each of these tokens is a little bit different. So this unusual whales description, it says it gives us access to tools on that particular website. So there's a site called Unusual Whales that shows unusual market activity and options activity. I mentioned it in the Nancy Pelosi video I made, so you can see this option flow, right? And so having that NFT, I think, gives you access to some of their NFT tools. So these NFTs are used in a variety of ways. It's not just art. Some of them grant you access to particular communities. And there's also this parttimelarry.eth, and that's actually an ENS domain. So instead of typing out that full long address, you can send money to this Ethereum address, and it's mapped to my wallet, and I get money when you do that. All right, so you'll notice there's a couple broken ones here. Why is that? Well, those are the Wanderers, and those aren't actually images. You'll notice these end in MP4, so they're actually movie files. And NFTs aren't limited to JPEGs or PNGs, for instance. You can actually create an NFT for a movie file. I think you can do it for an audio file. There's these startups like Audius who are helping musicians. So there's a lot of ways people are trying to apply this. And so let's go ahead and just check the image URL and see if if asset image URL, and we can use Python's ends with for a string, so we can do ends with. If it ends in MP4, what are we going to do? Well, luckily for us, Streamlit has st.video, and we can just display this as a video. So st.video image URL, and let's just else it's an image for simplicity for now. And then if I run that now, you'll see now not only do we have this whale here, we also have this video file. Right, so that's displayed now, and then we also have our ENS domain, and we have one more thing that's not displaying here, and we'll worry about that in a minute. I think we have some SVG files, and I'm not going to spend any time on that. It'll be in the source code that I post up on GitHub at github.com/hackingthemarkets, but basically you can get an SVG in Streamlit, and you need to actually request the image and decode it and display it. So there's a couple extra lines of code. They'll be in a snippet on the GitHub page. So let's go ahead and put like a title and a description, or just a title on these. So what we can do is before each of the images, we can say st.write asset, and I think it's just title in our, no, it's not title, it's name. So I'm going to do st.write name. If I do that, you see we have one called dev1632. That's an SVG, and then I have whale6209. The Wanderers collection looks like they don't use the name attribute. This is the Xerion collection, which is actually an MOV file. So I can also do and asset or asset image URL dot ends with MOV, and you can render these. So I'm going to give you a rendering function that'll render all of these, and then for the now I picked up my Xerion Genesis collection here, and then let me go ahead and say if asset, well, you'll notice on Wanderers, for instance, right, the collection has a name. So if I look at collection, that actually has a name. So we'll just put the collection name. So if asset name, we're going to st.write the asset's name. Otherwise, we're going to do we'll just do the collection's name. So we'll write asset collection name like that. And that should give us a name for the Wanderers, and then we'll also display the asset's token ID, right? And so we can do a plus or an F string. So I'll do an F string, and then I will do a number, and then we'll do asset token ID like that. And if you do that, you see I have whales number 6209 and the Wanderers number 7543, and I'm successfully hitting the assets endpoint of the OpenSea API displaying the image, and the titles for each of those. So now we have a pretty good understanding of how to use Streamlit to build this nice dashboard and these form widgets, and how to interactively query the OpenSea NFT API, pull back some data and render it in the content section, and also look at the JSON data that's provided by OpenSea. So let's move on to another endpoint. Let's go ahead and fill out what it looks like when you switch over to events. All right, so since I've already been talking nearly 30 minutes now, it'll take me probably an hour and a half to code this whole thing out, and I don't want to repeat the same pattern since we're just hitting different API endpoints. So I think we've covered the pattern of how to use Streamlit to lay out these widgets, how to have that document react and request different API endpoints, and how the sorting and filtering and all of that sort of stuff works with OpenSea. So let's fast forward it a little bit, and I'm going to walk you through the final product. Same way in a cooking show, they kind of show you the final cake or whatever you're making. They don't show the slow process of watching the cake bake in the oven. So I'm gonna walk you through this here. And so we've already built this assets view here. So this is a list. You can browse through and see some assets that are currently being listed, right? And then let's switch over to events here, and let's look at this event. So how do we get this pandas data frame with bids and asks? So this is the night of October 7th here. So it's about 9 p.m. October 7th, this is showing UTC time right here. So this is showing the bidder, the bid amount, the collection, and the token ID. So we're showing the bids that are coming in. And we also have some filters where you can filter by collection, contract address, token ID, and event type, right? And for this one, I am using the OpenSea API, and there's just this events endpoint, right? So it's just another endpoint that you hit. As soon as I select events, we're gonna make a request to events, and we're gonna pass another parameter dictionary, and we'll let them filter by the contract address, so the Ethereum contract address, the collection slug if they want to, filter to a specific token if we just want to see bids and ask on a particular token, and we can do some pagination if we want to show like 20 at a time, and also if we want to show date input, so we can show events that occurred like today or yesterday, right? And make those types of queries, right? And so we're displaying a variety of inputs here again on the left side. And then if you look in here, I just have if endpoint equals events, then we show those different sidebar options for the collection, contract address, and event type. And then if any of those inputs are selected, we build our parameter dictionary once again. And instead, we make a request to the events API. We pass it in our parameters. And then we just go through our event list, and we can format and display these events however we want. And let me show you how this looks. So if we do st.write, and we show the events response, I'll show you what the JSON data looks like at the bottom. So I'm going to do rerun here. So below this data frame, you'll see the raw JSON response. And what I did was transform this raw JSON response with asset events, and I built a pandas data frame. So what I did was loop through these asset events. So I'm looping through the asset events, and then you can build a list of lists here. So I have event lists, and I'm just appending a list of values to this list here. So I'm appending the created date, the bidder, the bid amount, the collection name, and the token ID. So I'm building this as a list, and then I make a new pandas data frame. I just pass it my event list, and I give it a list of columns. So I'm passing in a list of these, and then I pass these labels for columns, and then I'll make this little grid component. And the cool thing about Streamlit, if you just do st.write and a pandas data frame, it'll display just a nice table like this. And I think you can even sort too, so you get sorting out of the box. So I can sort by bid amount, so you can see these V friends. So I think that's Gary V's collection. There's people bidding 8 ETH for one of these right now. You see there's Dr. Burry's online right now. He's bidding on some me bits, and then there's these pudgy penguins. And yeah, so that's how you build a data frame and display it using Streamlit. And then let's look at this rarity endpoint that I made. And so I'm going to run this. And you can see this is querying a particular collection that I was interested in and using a basic formula for calculating the rarity. So how did I do that? So at the very beginning, we made a simple script that queried all assets in a particular collection. So we used this assets endpoint, right? And remember, we limited it and gave it a collection slug. So what I did for this is I queried the asset endpoint for the wanderers, and then I gave it these order by and order direction attributes. So if I look at this assets endpoint, you see there's an order by and order direction. So you can order by token ID, sale count, total price, and direction, right? And so what I did was get all of the wanderers, order by PK, like the primary key, so token ID 0123, and there's 8,888 of them in this collection. And what I did was fetch 50 of them at a time. So it won't give you all of them at a time. So I looped and I did while true. I fetched with parameters offset and limit 50, right? And then I kept building this list. So you see this dot extend. So I'm extending this asset list, right? And then that's going into one big list that I'm going to dump in JSON format, right? And so what I did was in this while true, I kept checking the length of the number of assets. And if it was less than 50, then it fetched again. So I increment offset by 50. So I get the first 50, then 51 through 100, then 101 through 150, and so forth. So I get all of the pages. So we're fetching all of the assets, and then I'm just dumping them to a file. So I do this JSON dumps data at the end, and I redirect that output into this giant assets.json here. And you can see in this file, I have a giant text file that has the JSON data of every single wanderer. So I fetched all, however many pages that is, all 8,888 wanderers, put it in a big JSON file here. And then, so the reason I did it in a file is because I don't want this to query the OpenSea API over and over again. There's throttling, there's limits on this. They don't want you to hammer it to death. So I fetched it all in advance and I put it in a JSON file. So if you then look at the endpoint I have for rarity here, what I did was open the assets JSON file, read it in, I looped through all the assets, and then what I did was calculate a certain rarity score for each one. And this is like the simplest formula. So I looked at how many had a particular trait. So let's say only 39 of them have a left arm with a chicken, and then 25 of them have a right arm with a switch or whatever, and then certain ones have certain screens above them, right? You just get the trait count and divide by the total number of NFTs in that particular collection, and I just multiplied them together. So if there's so I just use a multiplication rule of probability similar to like dice rolls, right? So if you roll, your probability of rolling a 6 when you're rolling dice is 1 out of 6, right? And what's your probability of rolling 2 6s in a row? Well, 1 over 6 times 1 over 6. So you have like a 1 in 36 chance of having 2 6s in 2 dice rolls. And so what we can do is, just do a simple formula to multiply and calculate the probability that a certain NFT has a combination of traits. And there's other ways to calculate this. I think the rarity tools puts emphasis on the number of traits. So only certain wanderers have 17 traits. A lot of other ones only have like 15 traits, for instance. And so there's some bonus points for rarity there. So all I did was see how rare a particular trait count is and that combination and multiply them together. And then I built this list. And so I appended a list with the token ID, name, and some rarity score, and the traits, the image URL, and the collection. And then I used the Python sorted function to sort using a custom function. So I have a list of objects and then, or a list of dictionaries, and then I'm sorting them by the dictionary's rarity for each of those objects. So it's ordering this big old list by rarity, right? And then I'm just showing the top 20. So I'm looping through the assets sorted, the first 20 of them, and then I'm rendering that asset on the screen and writing out all the traits. So I'm just writing those traits to the screen. And so if you look here, I'm writing the name and description, and then I'm showing the number of traits, which is 15. So I'm printing the length of the traits of that asset, and then showing each of the traits and the number that have this. So the trait count, so the number that have this. So my little simple formula calculates Wanderers 5224 as the third rarest, right? That has 17 traits and all these different traits. I didn't really take into account the number of traits. Rarity Tools has this one that I calculate as third as number 1. So you can tweak this formula however you want. I just did a simple multiplication here to calculate the odds of having all these different traits. And that's about it. And then since I'm rendering using the same rendering code to render the SVGs and the movies and so forth, I made a combined function called render asset that will just display a single asset. So I reused that function on the rarity endpoint and also on the assets endpoint. That way I have the same code written one time to just take one asset and display it in a nice, pretty way. And that is it. I hope you learned a little bit about Streamlit and the OpenSea NFT API. Play around with this, tweak it however you want. Check out the source code that I put up on GitHub. Try this out. Check out your favorite. Find some cool art projects that you may be interested in. Add some filters, maybe build some alerts and other cool tools on top of it. And in a follow-up, I'm going to go even deeper into this. I just needed to get basically familiar with what kind of data OpenSea provides and use OpenSea a little bit so that I understand it. But now I can go a little bit deeper. If you click on SDK here, there's OpenSea.js, this SDK that provides even more advanced functionality. So I'm going to do a lot more JavaScript videos coming up soon as I dive further in here, because the crypto ecosystem has a lot of JavaScript libraries that you'll need to deal with if you want to go further and further. And you see there's a lot of powerful functionality in here, like programmatic. You can do programmatic fetching, buying, selling, accepting offers, transferring items, gifting. A lot of cool stuff you can do with OpenSea.js. So the next time I talk about OpenSea, I'm going to use JavaScript and see what we can do as far as, building something to buy and sell. So see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. As always, like and subscribe, and see you in the next one. Bye.